There comes a time in life when the noise of the world no longer satisfies your soul. You wake up one day and realize that the conversations you once enjoyed now feel empty, the company you once craved now feels heavy, and the places you once went no longer give you the same comfort they used to. It's not that you have suddenly become arrogant or distant, it's that your frequency is changing. Your spirit is searching for something higher, and in that climb, not everyone will follow. Some will watch you drift away and not understand why. Some will let go of your hand without a word. And some will walk away entirely, leaving you with the quiet understanding that this is simply how the journey works. Amara had always been a giver. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, checked in on friends without being asked, and offered her presents to anyone who seemed lonely. But over the years, she noticed something: no matter how much she gave, very few gave back. She found herself drained, carrying the weight of other people's struggles while her own heart grew heavier with unspoken pain. It was not resentment that grew inside her, but a deep, aching emptiness. She thought this was just life, until something inside her shifted. It started with silence. She began taking long walks alone in the early mornings, when the air was still cool and the world had not yet woken up. At first, she filled the silence with music or podcasts, but over time, she let herself just listen, to the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of life, and the rhythm of her own breath. The more time she spent in this stillness, the more she began to feel her inner voice grow louder. It was a voice she had ignored for years, drowned out by the noise of other people's expectations. Now, it was telling her something she couldn't ignore: it's time to rise. Rising, she discovered, was not the glamorous transformation she once imagined. It was messy, lonely, and at times, deeply painful. As she started setting boundaries, people began to distance themselves. Friends she had known for years stopped calling. Invitations to gatherings became rare. Even family members questioned her new habits, her refusal to gossip, her choice to spend weekends reading instead of attending parties, her sudden focus on meditation and journaling. They said she was changing, as though it were a crime. But the truth was, she was changing, not for them, but for herself. There was one moment that solidified everything for her. She had been sitting at her favorite cafe, a small, quiet place tucked away from the main road. Across from her sat Lila, her oldest friend, who was complaining about the same toxic relationship she had been in for years. Amara had listened to this same story countless times, always offering comfort, advice, and reassurance. But that day, something shifted. She realized Lila wasn't looking for change, she was looking for someone to keep validating her pain so she could stay in it. Amara felt a deep compassion, but also a clear understanding: she could no longer be the person who enabled others to remain stuck. Not if she wanted to keep growing. Leaving that cafe, she knew she would lose more people along the way. And she did. Her social circle grew smaller, and her days quieter. But in that quiet, she found peace. She began waking up earlier, writing down her dreams, meditating before sunrise. She surrounded herself with books, nature, and conversations that felt nourishing. Slowly, she began to meet new people, kindred spirits who valued growth, truth, and authenticity over surface-level comfort. They weren't many, but they were real. And they didn't cling, they walked beside her freely. Still, there were nights when the loneliness hit hard. Nights when she scrolled through old photos and remembered the laughter she once shared with those who were now gone. There were moments when she questioned if this path was worth it, if losing so many was the price of truly finding herself. But each time doubt crept in, something deep inside whispered, "Not everyone can come with you." And she understood. The higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes. Not everyone is meant to breathe at your altitude. What Amara didn't know was that her transformation was far from over. The people who had left her life were only the beginning. The deeper she stepped into her new frequency, the more life itself would rearrange, pulling away everything that no longer matched her energy, making space for something far greater than she could yet imagine. It would be a season of endings, but also the quiet planting of new beginnings. And so, she kept walking forward, even as familiar voices faded into the distance. She didn't chase them anymore. She didn't lower her frequency to make them comfortable. She understood that letting go was not a loss, it was an act of love, both for herself and for them. Because sometimes, the most compassionate thing you can do is to allow someone to stay exactly where they are, while you continue to rise. The weeks turned into months, and Amara's life took on a new rhythm. It was slower, calmer, yet richer in ways she couldn't have explained before. She began noticing the smallest details, a bird landing near her window, the way sunlight filtered through her curtains, the quiet hum of the world at dawn. Life felt different, as though she was finally in sync with something bigger than herself. She no longer felt the constant rush to keep up with others, instead, she felt pulled toward her own truth, her own pace. But growth, she learned, was not a straight path. It was a spiral, sometimes taking her higher, sometimes pulling her back to old lessons she thought she had mastered. There were days when memories of her old life came back like whispers, tempting her to return. She missed the warmth of group laughter, the comfort of being surrounded by familiar faces, even if those faces never truly understood her. Sometimes she would pass by the old cafe, see Lila sitting inside with someone else, and feel a twinge of something she couldn't quite name. Was it sadness, nostalgia, or simply the ghost of a life she had outgrown? One cold autumn evening, the truth hit her harder than ever. She was walking home from the market, her scarf pulled tightly around her neck, when she received a message from an old friend: "We don't see you anymore. You've changed." She stared at the screen for a long time. Once upon a time, such words would have pierced her deeply, sending her into a spiral of guilt and self-doubt. But now, they only brought a quiet smile. Yes, she had changed. And she wasn't sorry. She typed back, "I have. I hope you're well," and left it at that. That night, she sat by her window with a cup of tea, looking out at the city lights. She realized something profound: people don't really leave you because you've done something wrong. They leave because your energy no longer feeds the version of themselves they are comfortable with. When you begin to rise, you stop resonating with certain frequencies, and they feel it. It's not rejection, it's alignment. And alignment is never personal, it's simply the truth of energy. It was in that stillness that Amara began to see the deeper purpose of her journey. This wasn't about losing people, it was about making room. The universe doesn't take without giving, it only clears space for what is meant to be. And sure enough, new souls began to enter her life, quietly, naturally. She met an elderly woman at the park who taught her about the power of gratitude. She crossed paths with a painter who spoke about art as a form of prayer. She began attending small gatherings of people who meditated together in silence, where words were few but connection was deep. One evening, after one such gathering, she walked home under a sky full of stars. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the ache of loneliness. She felt whole, even in her solitude. She understood now that being alone did not mean being empty, it meant being full enough that you didn't need to be filled by anyone else's presence. And in that fullness, the right connections found their way to her, not through force, but through resonance. Of course, there were still moments of grief. She still thought about the friends who had drifted away, still felt pangs when she saw old photos or heard songs that reminded her of them. But instead of wishing them back, she began sending them silent blessings. She would close her eyes and imagine them happy, loved, and at peace, wherever they were, whatever path they had chosen. She no longer needed to hold on to them to feel connected. Love, she realized, didn't always mean keeping someone close. Sometimes love meant letting them go, without bitterness, without regret. By winter, Amara had stepped fully into her new frequency. She felt lighter, clearer, more herself than ever before. The relationships that remained in her life were deeper, more honest, free from pretense. The conversations were soul-stirring, the silences comfortable. She no longer felt the urge to explain herself or prove her worth to anyone. She had learned that the people meant for her would understand her without her having to convince them. One snowy afternoon, she stood by her window watching the flakes fall softly to the ground. It struck her that this entire journey, every ending, every goodbye, every lonely night, had been preparing her for this peace. She thought about all the people who had left, and instead of sadness, she felt gratitude. If they had stayed, she might have never found this version of herself. She might have never climbed high enough to see the view from here. And so, with a heart full of both memory and hope, Amara whispered a truth she would carry forever: when you start raising your frequency, people will leave, and that's okay. Because the ones who remain, and the ones who arrive after, will match your soul in ways you never thought possible. Her life was no longer about holding on, it was about flowing. And in that flow, she had finally found freedom.